Episode 168 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode. Today it is the 13th of March 2023. And last week, I guess now, some of you will have received the results from the UN English Booth exam, freelance exam, and congratulations to those of you who passed. Commiserations to the many, many more who failed. Unfortunately, it's inevitable. It is the UN exam, so it's inevitably there's only going to be a small handful of people that will have passed. But yeah, I know a lot of you who were, studying, practicing to do the exam, and it's difficult. It's hard when you fail. You think you've put a lot of work in, and then you fall short. Basically, it's just to say we have all been there. This guy's been there, okay? So I myself failed on 2 occasions before I finally passed the UN exam. It was third time lucky. And with these kinds of things, when you fail, you sort of just have to put it down to experience and just build on it, just learn from your mistakes. Lots of cliches coming out here, but what else? What else can you do? I know a lot of you also are planning to take the SELP, the competitive exam, in April, and I really would encourage those of you not to. Those of you who are planning to do it, but then who failed the freelance and are sort of now a bit disconsolate, shall we say, despondent. I would encourage you, nevertheless, to go ahead and try for the competitive. It's not just the competitive that they will be certifying for. If your standard is good enough for freelance certification at that exam, you will receive freelance certification if you're deemed to have made the grade, as it were. So that's the message that I've got to sort of pass on to you. Is just if you have been selected to take the exam, it means you've met those criteria, and I really do encourage you to go ahead, go through with it, take the exam, and just do your best. As I say, you got another month to keep studying and trying to improve. It's a different day, different exam. So that's all I really wanted to say. And again, big and very sincere, heartfelt congratulations to those of you who passed. It's a big thing if you manage to pass the UN, be it the freelance or the competitive exam. Okay, so that's intro over. Now turning to the main, the meat of today's episode, which again I'm having to film for a second time, this intro, because I don't know, as usual, I ballsed something up the first time, and I lost the camera. I lost the image with my handsome features, you see. So I'm refilming this little bit. We're doing the SDGs. We're finishing finally our review of the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, you can watch the goals 1 to 11. I've done 1 to 11. I think I did 1 to 5 and then 6 to 11 in previous episodes, to which I shall leave the links to. So we're going to finish it today. I finally got myself together made myself do it, because to be honest, this SDGs, they're not very exciting. It's a bit of a drudge, okay? But that said, it's a very important element of what the UN does. The SDGs they are the brainchild of the UN. It's the UN that came up with the SDGs, and as a result, they get referenced all the time. They are the successors, of course, the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. So yes, they constantly get reference in lots of different kinds of meetings. And so if you're going to come and work at the UN, and again, not just at the UN, but many international organizations, it's a really important vocabulary set to be familiar with and to understand the links between policies that are being implemented and how they correlate to the SDGs, and knowing some of the vocab the important vocab is going to help you a lot. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to revert back to the original recording of this episode, and where I basically take you through it. I'll be sharing the screen with you, taking you through it, and hopefully it will set you in good stead. Certainly if you're taking another exam soon at the UN, I would highly advise you to watch this three-part series on the SDGs. Okay, so well, I'll hand over to me again. And you may recall, if you've watched the first 2 episodes, that the different languages get updated at different rates. So this is an episode that really should be for all language combinations. I'm going to focus mainly on the English, the Spanish, the French and Russian, because they're my sort of top languages. But even if with the Arabic and Chinese, I'm going to point you in the direction of those words that you should be focusing on, at least from the English. So you should get a copy of the Arabic version or the Chinese version in front of you as well. That's if you're an Arabic Chinese speaker, have that while we're going through this, so that you can cross-reference those important vocabulary points that I'm going to be highlighting. Now, as I said, there's a bit of the English version is the most up-to-date version, and the other versions seem to take a while to catch up. So I'll be using for the English version, you can see the website here because I'm sharing the screen, sdgs.un.org/goals/goals12. Then from the other languages, it's actually better, you get a better rundown if you go to this website here, un.org/sustainable development, and they give you the objective cible and so on. So we'll work off the basis of the English one initially. And if you may recall, again, if you watch the first 2 episodes, they give you this sort of, well, first of all, the name, okay? Sustainable consumption and production patterns. That is often, I've come into meetings that have been all about the subjects that's been devoted to the idea of sustainable consumption and production patterns, in fact. It sometimes even gets referred to as SCP, sustainable consumption and production. Again, that's a bit of a buzz phrase. And then here, okay, they give some of the main ideas in this, what would we call this? This little screenshot? No, whatever it is anyway. Unsustainable patterns, consumption, production of the root cause. The triple planetary crisis, right? That's something they talk about often. Okay, the triple planetary crises. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Too much food is being lost or wasted. These are useful words to know here, okay? Harvesting, transport, storage, and processing. So it's good to just be able to recognize what those are in the other languages. For example, here in the French, they have French version has got some overlap. Récolte, okay? I thought this was a useful word. No, okay. Entreposage, okay? Entreposage for storage. You may want to make a mental note of that one, okay? The Spanish one gives you cosecha for harvesting, almacenaje for storage. Almacenaje, procesamiento, that speaks for itself. And the Russian one, I'll focus least on the Russian because the Russians, they don't, the SDGs, it's not one of their big priorities, I would say. At least they don't, they keep, they're not very outspoken about it. But anyway, so sboru urожая, harvest, хранение, okay, storage, переработка, important word, processing. And okay, electronic waste, something that's get mentioned a lot. So let's have a look then at the targets and indicators. Okay, the 10-year framework of programs and stable consumption production patterns. Okay, that's fairly straightforward. So are the indicators: developing, adopting, implementing policy instruments, supporting the shift to sustainable consumption production. The shift, okay, maybe a good quick solution instead of always saying the transition. Shift could work as a synonym there. Sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources. And the indicators there, So unfortunately, you don't get given the indicators in the other languages. Material footprint, footprint per capita, material footprint per GDP, domestic material consumption, etc. One thing I'd note, in the French, they seem to sort of... there seems to be quite a lot of interchange between, for the concept of sustainability and durable, okay, sustainable consumption and production. But down here, you'll notice... they use the word rationnel, utilisation rationnelle des ressources naturelles. So, I mean, I hear that a lot actually when they talk about in these sort of environmental meetings or meetings on the SDGs, talking about rationnel. And I don't think I say sustainable. I think I tend to say rational, maybe, or effective. But there you go. So maybe sustainable is a better solution if you hear that sort of concept for rationnel. The Spanish just go with gestión sostenible, so that's easy enough to remember. Interesting though, in the title again of the actual SDG, producción y consumo responsables. Okay. So it's curious maybe how sometimes it differs what the English word used in the Spanish. So, and let's see what the Russians. Double check what the Russians say. They also call it ответственное. If you look here, ответственное потребление производства. So that's the idea of responsible. So what do you do if you hear it? What do you do if you hear in the booth ответственное потребление производства? I mean, I think you'd be forgiven for saying responsible. But well, now we know that that's the word, for whatever reason they choose to use for sustainable in this context. So I think you'd be fine using either or. Okay, so target 12.3. By 2030, half per capita global food waste at retail and consumer levels, reduce food losses along production supply chains, including post-harvest losses. Retail, that's a useful word that comes in quite a lot with meetings. Anything to do with trade and things. Okay, it's a good word to make sure that you're familiar with. Oddly, in the French, I can't see a reference to retail, but certainly in the Spanish, okay, you have venta al por menor. La venta al por menor. Remember that for retail. Okay. I think that's another important word here. I see desperdicio, waste, right? Global food waste. Remember that word, desperdicio. I've heard that come up in a lot of different contexts. And in the Russian... Again, not okay, отход is easy, but на розничном уровне, okay, розничный is to do with all things retail. Again, so those are useful words to know, okay, to be able to recognize. The indicators, okay, have these food waste index, food loss index. 12.4 achieves environmentally sound management of chemicals and all waste throughout the life cycle in accordance with the agreed national framework, significantly reduce their release to air, water and soil in order to minimize their adverse impact on human health and the environment. I'm just thinking their release to air, water and soil. Let's see what they have in the other languages for that. Leur déversement dans l'air, l'eau et le sol. Le déversement. Okay, take note. Su libération à la atmosphère. Okay. And the Russian gives you... Okay, ich papadanie. So these are not necessarily words that you might just immediately go to. So it's again, papadanie, okay, their release. I mean, okay, if you don't, you always paraphrase them if you hear them and you don't recognize them. It's always good. It's always going to impress someone if you know the exact terminology used. Okay, and then you have the indicators, parties to international multilateral environmental agreements on hazardous waste. Okay, that's a very important concept and this kind of thing. Talk about that all the time. Make sure you get to say it's hazardous, not dangerous. Especially if you're coming into English, So I think they may talk about les déchets dangereux, peut-être, maybe. Peligroso in Spanish. So in English, you want to be translating that as hazardous waste, not dangerous waste. Okay. Okay, 12.5. Substantially reduce waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling, and reuse. Now, I think we may have come across these concepts in under some of the other SDGs. Prévention, la réduction, le recyclage, et la réutilisation. That's fairly straightforward in the French. And in the Spanish. I think Russian, there's a couple of those ideas. Okay. Not as immediately obvious. Okay, образование, сокращению, переработке и повторному использованию. Okay, so okay, that's the recycling. Предотвращение, prevent, that's easy enough. Сокращение, reduction. Переработка is recycling, повторному использованию is the reuse. Alright. Target 12.7, promote public procurement practices that are sustainable in accordance with national policies and priorities. If you're interested in just public procurement, to spot that word when you run into it. Passation des marchés publics. You see, that's not something. If you're new at this game, that's not an expression you're necessarily going to recognize immediately. For public procurement, I haven't heard that expression used in a long time. I think it's usually talk about marché. Yeah, marché they talk about marché public. The full expression is passation des marchés publics. So get that word, that passation. So this is public procurement. And in Spanish, adquisición pública. The Russian. Okay, государственные закупки. Okay. Indicators, anything here? Implementing sustainable. Okay, not really. 12.8. Ensure that people everywhere have the relevant information, awareness of sustainable development and lifestyles in harmony with nature. Pretty straightforward. Global citizenship education. That's something that comes up a lot in these indicators. So you just, maybe it's useful to know that sort of expression. 12A, support developing countries to strengthen their scientific technological capacity to move towards more sustainable patterns of consumption and production. Straightforward enough. Renewable energy generating capacity in developing countries in watts per capita. But again, it's maybe just useful to know what the measurements are for some of these concepts. So watts per capita when it comes to energy being generated by power plants, nuclear plants. Okay. Target 12B, develop, implement tools to monitor sustainable development impacts for sustainable tourism that creates jobs and promotes local culture and products. Again, that seems straightforward enough. Accounting tools to monitor economic and environmental aspects of tourism sustainability. And then the final target, 12C, rationalize inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that encourage wasteful consumption by removing market distortions. Phasing out there's a lot of useful stuff here. Phasing out harmful subsidies. Let's see what these are in some of the way this is expressed in some of the other languages. Okay, so in the French, they talk about rationaliser les subventions combustibles fossiles. Okay, so they use rationalize, yeah. Subvention, they're not subventions, right? They're subsidies. Okay. Spanish gives you... Okay, that's fairly straightforward. Racionalizar los subsidios. Russian is probably rationalize. That seems to be the in word here. Rationalize, rationalización, rationalizировать. Okay. Ископаемого топлива. Just, yeah, maybe that might, if you're a newbie, that might just initially trouble you. Fossil fuel, okay, ископаемое топливо. And let's see. phasing out harmful subsidies. That's a use. If you can get these expressions out, you're going to sound very impressive. So restructuring in the English, restructuration. La fiscalité, just say it, that's taxation, right? And in Spanish, sistemas tributarios. Okay, I would probably, if I heard that, I didn't know this, I'd probably say tax systems, but okay, taxation. Subsidios perjudiciales. What do we say that was in English? Harmful subsidies, okay. And how do we say for phase out? Eliminación gradual, okay. What do we say it was for phasing out in French? I forget. Eliminación progressive, okay, there is there. I mean, if you just say the progressive elimination, if you hear that in French, just say the progressive elimination of harmful subsidies, no one's going to notice. But again, yeah. Phase out, again, it's one of the phasing in, phasing out. Those are sort of quite impressive, shall we say, expressions to be able to come up with at the mic in the booth. And the Russians say налогообложение. That's important. Okay, that's taxation. You don't have to do anything fancy like the levying of taxes. That might be the first thing that springs to mind. Well, it would for me. Okay, just say taxation. Отказ от вредных субсидий. Okay, the отказ. Geez, that отказ, if you're a Russizon there. That word has so many, it can just be tweaked in so many different ways depending on the context. Refuse, reject, abandon, forego. Here it's phasing out, eliminate, or whatever. Yeah, I don't know about you. I'm speaking to the Russians. That word, отказ, kind of pisses me off sometimes. I have been known, and in certain situations, I can't. The word doesn't come to me, and I've just ended up saying "say no to" in the context. Like here, imagine you've got this, and gradually saying no to harmful subsidies. If nothing else, if nothing else comes into your mind at that moment, say no. Okay, that's it. And then the indicator amount of fossil fuel subsidies per unit of GDP. So that is that's SDG 12 for you. Okay, so moving swiftly along like a gazelle striding through the savannah. SDG 13. So this is on climate change. This will be a very important one. I have promised to do a breakdown like this of the Paris Accords, and I haven't forgotten. I will try and get around to that. But anyway, SDG 13. So let's have a look at the picture that we get here. Climate change is humanity's code red warning. Climate catastrophe. Temperature for coral reefs. That's a useful word to know in your other languages. Les récifs in French or Spanish. You might want to look up that word. Droughts, okay, again, important idea. Energy-related CO2 emissions increased by 6%. Okay, climate financing. Global temperatures continue unabated. There's a good word in English, unabated. Okay, the French one, it's not been updated, the French one. I'm just looking here. Sécheresse, okay, for droughts. Flooding. Inondation. So let's go back to the English, take a look then at the targets and indicators. All right. Strengthen resilience. Adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards, natural disasters, so resilience again. I think it's a very favorite UN word. Favorite word at the UN. Resilience or resiliencia. Russian. What did we say it was? I must say I can't remember. Сопротивляемость for resilience here. Okay. 13.2. Integrate climate change measures in national policy strategies and plans. That's very blah blah. Okay. Then we have the indicators here. Oh, did we look at the indicator here? Oh, we didn't? Okay, sorry. For target 13.1. Number of deaths, missing persons, directly affected persons. Okay. number of countries adopt and implement national disaster risk reduction strategies. That's a bit of a buzz expression, okay? And they often, in that context, they quote the Sendai framework. Full name: Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. But yeah, be able to recognise that. I think that was, we might have discussed this in one of the previous 2 episodes. I think that was adopted in the aftermath of the Fukushima disaster. Governments adopt and implement local disaster risk reduction strategies in line with risk reduction strategies. Okay. So going back to the Target 13.2 indicator, countries with nationally determined contributions, that is a very important concept to be familiar with. These are often called NDCs, and you'll want to know that. You'll want to know what that is in your other, whatever your target language is, if you're in any of the other booths, okay? So be able to reckon, you'll hear that in English you'll hear that as an NDC, and you want to probably find out if there's in the other languages there may well be an acronym used. United Nations, as reported, the Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Okay, that the name of that is actually, in some of the other languages, can be a bit tricky to spot, but because we don't have the indicators in the other languages, I'll wait for it to come up here a bit further down. Greenhouse gas emissions per year. Okay, Target 13.3, improve education, awareness raising and human institutional capacity and climate change mitigation, adaptation, impact reduction, and early warning. These are important little package of concepts. Mitigation, for example, that in the other languages is atténuation, of course. It wasn't coming to me in the French. Atténuation, mitigation. You want to make sure you're getting that. In Spanish, reducción de sus mitigación. Okay, they use mitigación. Again, alerta temprana is very important there. And I think in French it's something to do with précoce, right? Oh, d'alerte rapide. Okay, that's what they use for early warning. And the Russian, just for check in with the Russians. Раннее предупреждение. Okay. Смягчение остроты. Mitigation. Oh, they like this expression, don't they? Coming from Russia. Ослабление последствия. I often talk about that. Смягчение последствия. Ослабление последствия. I often find myself saying, like, dealing with the consequences of climate change, coping with, which these are sort of valid alternatives in the moment if the mot juste doesn't come to you immediately. Again, it indicates this global citizenship education. Okay, 13A, implement the commitment undertaken by developed country parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, so the UNFCCC, goal of mobilizing jointly 100 billion from all sources, meaningful mitigation actions, fully operationalize the Green Fund through its capitalization as soon as possible. This is all wording that I feel like I've run into a lot. Let's see how it's rendered in other languages. Okay, the Convention Cadre, Framework Convention, that more or less speaks for itself. Okay, rendre le fonds vert opérationnel speaks for itself, pretty much. French does anyway. In the Spanish, Convención Marco, okay. They don't tend to use acronyms really from in Spanish and French. Poner en pleno funcionamiento el Fondo Verde, operationalize the Green Fund. And the Russians talk about обеспечить полномасштабное функционирование Зеленого климатического фонда путем его капитализации. Okay, more or less fairly straightforward. But what is This the Russian actual equivalent of the UNFCCC. So in when I was in Egypt last year at the climate change conference in Sharm el Sheikh, I do remember them referring to the Rukon, and so that is something that you want to be ready for if they hit you with that. The Russians are more inclined, I find, to use acronyms than Spanish and French. Yeah, watch out for that Rukon. In fact, I tell a lie. Okay, go back to the Russians. Just a few Russians, okay. Рамочная конвенция об изменении климата. Yeah, they were saying Rakik. That was the acronym I was running into, coming from Russian. Rakik. That was what they were called. So watch out for that, all right, you Russisons, you Russians. And then let's see. Target 13B, promote mechanisms for raising capacity for effective climate change related planning. Blah blah blah. Least developed countries, LDCs, you know that, don't you? Small island developing states, the SIDS. Okay, you know that, you should know that stuff. And let's see the indicator, anything here? Again, mention of these nationally determined contributions, again, just to hammer that point home, NDCs. Okay, let's go to number 14 then. Okay, long title here. Conserve, sustainably use the ocean, seas and marine resources for sustainable development. Okay, this is all about the oceans then. Here we have the diagrams. Ocean is in danger. Let's see. Plastic marine pollution, that's a big issue, right? Overfishing. Note these expressions that use acidification, eutrophication. I'm not even certain what that is. Ocean warming. This is statistic kind of thing that might pop up. The ocean absorbs around 1/4 of global annual CO2 emissions. Plastic pollution choking the ocean. 17 million metric tons of plastics entering the oceans. Then 90% of world's fishers, you can call them fishers, are employed in small-scale fisheries. Let's see if the French one has anything similar to that. Interesting, okay, the French had talk about these zones protégées, marine protected areas, MPAs. That's a concept that is referred to. Okay, petit états insulaires, your SIDS, aren't they? Pays les moins avancés, les PMA. That is an acronym they use from the French, so that for the LDCs. Okay, let's go to targets and indicators then in the English. Target 14.1, prevent significantly reduced marine pollution of all kinds, in particular from land-based activities, including marine debris and nutrient pollution. Okay, marine debris, that's the sort of thing that's going to be good to know. Déchets marines. Okay, les déchets en mer, and from the French. La pollution par les nutriments. See, I wouldn't have known that. Nutrient pollution. Pollución por nutrientes. And interesting, okay. Detritos marinos, like detritus, huh? I haven't seen that word before in Spanish, but there you go. Загрязнение морским мусором и питательными веществами. Okay, nutrients. Okay, питательные вещества, nutrients. Okay. I see, I'm learning things myself. Coastal eutrophication, plastic debris, eutrophication. I'm going to have to look up what eutrophication is. I don't know what that is. Like I said, I know what the word, I'm concerned here with the words here. I'm not a scientist. I was shit at science at school. That was one thing I wasn't. I was good at languages. I was pretty good at history. I was rubbish at science. So I'll find the definition for eutrophication to give you when I come to producing it. Okay, 14.2, sustainably manage, protect marine coastal ecosystems to avoid significant adverse impacts, strengthening resilience. Take action for the restoration to achieve healthy, productive oceans. That's pretty straightforward. Ecosystem-based approaches to managing marine areas. Yeah, that's something that I've heard a few times. Ecosystem-based approaches. Minimize, address the impact of ocean acidification, including through enhanced scientific cooperation at all times. What do the Russians say for acidification? Zakislenie okeana. Okay, that might not be immediately. I mean, it's easy enough from the French and the Spanish. I'm sure it's just like acidificación or whatever. Okay, zakislenie okeana, acidification. Look that up. If you're one of your languages, Arabic's probably got. I don't imagine they have a word. Acidia, I'm guessing. So look up what acidification is in Arabic. 14th. Okay, sorry. And then we get indicator. Average marine acidity measured at sampling stations. Okay, 14.4. Regulate harvesting and end overfishing. Oh, listen. Okay, this is an important one. Okay, I'm going to read this also in English. Effectively regulate harvesting and end overfishing, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, and destructive fishing practices. Implement science-based management plans in order to restore fish stocks in the shortest time feasible, at least to levels that can produce maximum sustainable yield as determined by their biological characteristics. Okay, this is an important one. Harvest, I think we've already covered that. I mean, there was cosecha and récolte. In Russian, it was добыча. Okay, that's important. Okay, yeah, harvest. We're talking about foodstuffs. Now, this reminds me of my old days back in New York, where you had back in New York there was a regular, maybe twice a year, there were meetings on some global fisheries agreement. I can't remember the exact name of it, but they would go into a lot of this stuff. The idea of overfishing, for example, okay, which in I think there's a fish stocks agreement. Was that it? Okay, la surpêche. Okay, in French. In Spanish, la pesca excesiva. Перелов in Russian. And now this concept, okay, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. That was known as IUU fishing. Okay, you will hear that acronym used. IUU. Which is illicite non déclaré non réglementé in French. In Spanish, ilegal no declarada no reglamentada, and in Russian, незаконно не сообщаемый нерегулируемый. Okay, so that's an important concept, I can tell you straight away. Restore fish stocks. Fish stocks, is that anything complicated there? Rétablir des stocks de poissons, easy. Restablecer las poblaciones de peces and восстановить рыбные запасы. Okay. Maximum sustainable yield. Okay, let's see what that is in other languages. That sounds to me that's a interesting concept for yield. Rendement constant maximal. Spanish, rendimiento. Russian, максимальный экологически рациональный улов. Okay, there you go. Just be grateful, as I say, at least if you're in the English booth, just be grateful that the Russians, and were they active actually in this sort of subject? They were. I remember back in New York, there were times when they sort of moved into action on these kinds of things. I suppose they do, yeah. I mean, obviously Russia's has a massive fishing industry, I guess. So yeah. Now I think back, I think there was a fish stocks. What was that agreement? The fish stocks agreement. Okay, 14.5. Conserve at least 10% of coastal and marine areas consistent with national and international law based on best available scientific information. Protected areas in relation to marine areas. This is what I was saying, you know, these MPAs, these marine protected areas. Zonas protegidas, that kind of thing. Okay, 14.6, prohibit certain forms of fishery subsidies which contribute to overcapacity, overfishing. Okay, talking again about IUU fishing, new subsidies, special differential treatment. That's something you'd hear a lot about generally in the UN, differential treatment, diferenciado, for developing the LD and the LDCs. Okay, should be part of the WTO fisheries subsidies negotiation. Okay. Implementation of international instruments to combat IUU fishing. Okay, 14.7, economic benefits to SIDS, LDCs, sustainable use, sustainable management of fisheries, aquaculture and tourism. Okay, proportion of GDP is the indicator. 14A, scientific knowledge, research capacity, transfer of marine technology, Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission criteria, guidelines on the transfer of marine technology to improve ocean health, enhanced contribution of marine biodiversity, development of developing countries, in particular SIDS, LDCs. I've not heard of this Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission criteria. It's a new one on me, I have to say. What are they called in the language? Commission Oceanographique Intergouvernementale. Okay. Maybe worth recognizing, useful to just be able to recognize it. Indicator, budget allocated to research. 14B, provide access for small-scale artisanal fishers to marine resource and market. Let's see what that expression is. Small-scale artisanal fishers. Petit pêcheurs. Okay, so don't call them little fishers. Okay, don't call them little fishers. That sounds stupid. Okay, call them small-scale artisanal fishers. Okay, Spanish. Pescadores artesanales. Okay, artisanal fishers. Russian. Okay, мелких хозяйств. Занимающихся кустарным рыбным промыслом. Okay. Мелких хозяйств. It's good to know, good to know. Look that up in Arabs, Chinese. Look that up. It's like, you know, with small arms, light weapons. Okay, don't say little arms. You know, the SALWs, yeah. Little, avoid the word little. Generally, perhaps. Degree of application of policy, institutional framework, recognises and protects access rights for small-scale fisheries, right? 14C, enhance conservation, sustainable use of oceans, resources by implementing international laws reflected in, here we go, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, 1982, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, that certainly brings back memories of being in New York. There was always an annual mission to Jamaica. I went on it twice, to Kingston, Jamaica, man, and it was, that was some hairy vocabulary for those meetings. It's called the UNCLOS. And what's it in French? Droit de la mer. There we go. Convention sur le droit de la mer, right? Spanish, Derecho del Mar, and Morskoye Prava, if I'm not mistaken, in Russian. Convenция по морскому праву. And the Russians often call it just the 1982 convention. So I'm pretty sure it was 1982 because they said it often enough. All right. And the indicator, countries progress ratifying, accepting, implementing, blah 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 blah. Okay, conservation, sustainable use. Okay, that should do it for SDG 14. Okay, it's gone to number 15 now. Protect, restore, promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. Okay, so immediately something in. Okay, dégradation. Let's see how similar it is in the French. I think this enrayer, inverser le processus de dégradation. Enrayer. What do we say that was in English then? Halt. Enrayer. Can you come across that word a bit? Always, yeah, the word I seem to remember once saying to check it, keep it in check. Halt, to halt it. So that's a useful word to know, perhaps. Detener, okay. Stopping, halting, right. Обращение вспять. So what was that in English? So it's reversing. Look at that in the Russian. Обращение вспять. Процесса деградации земель. So reversing. Okay, let's see the diagram. Anything interesting here? Hectares destroyed, largely neglected. Okay, risk, to be at risk of extinction. That's an important, in English that's that's the expression we use. Okay, so not at risk of disappearing or whatever, at risk of extinction. The Nagoya Protocol on genetic resources, didn't know that. Okay, freshwater, terrestrial, mountain, key biodiversity areas. Okay, so yeah, interesting. So terrestre in French, if you hear terrestre, chances are it's just going to be terrestrial, right? Terrestrial ecosystems. I would sometimes say land-based, which would be okay. Interesting that terrestrial seems to be acceptable. Anything in the French diagram of interest? Okay. Let's go on. Let's go see the in targets and indicators. Okay. Okay, by 2020, a lot of these targets should have been reached by now. You might have noticed a lot of these are by 2020. Oh, there's some interesting stuff here, by the way. Ensure the conservation, restoration, sustainable use of terrestrial and inland freshwater ecosystems and their services, in particular forests, wetlands, mountains, and drylands, in line with obligations under international agreements. Now, perhaps we touched on this in some of the previous SDGs. This is important wording, though. Wetlands, drylands. Okay. So let's see terrestrial and inland freshwater ecosystems. Écosystème terrestre, écosystème d'eau douce. Okay, not too difficult. Spanish in écosystème de agua dulce. Наземных for terrestrial, land-based. Пресноводных экосистем. Okay, наземных, right? Now, wetlands, mountains, and drylands. Now, I know I've struggled with some of this. Sometimes if I haven't done one of these sort of environment meetings in a long time, you get dropped in. These are not words that will immediately spring to mind, I tell you. Okay, what do the French say for that? Zone humide, wetlands, right? Montagne et zone aride, drylands. Now, I know in Spanish, if I remember rightly, for wetlands, humedales. Am I right? Yes, humedales. There you go. It's humedales. I can't remember what they are in Russian. What are they? Vodno. Ooh, yeah. I've run into this stuff, Vodno-болотных угодий. Vodno-болотных угодий. Wetlands, засушливых земель. Okay, that's more obvious perhaps for dry lands. Okay, that's important vocab to know. Certainly if you're going to come and work at the UN, maybe they won't force something like this. Well, in an exam, they might, you never know. But yeah, you will run into this vocab if you work at the UN. Forest area, these are just the indicators. Important sites for terrestrial freshwater biodiversity. Okay, 15.2. Promote implementation of sustainable management of all types of forests. Halt deforestation. Restore degraded forests. Substantially increase afforestation and reforestation globally. Afforestation. I guess that means creating new forests, right? Again, I'm not a science expert, but well, let's see. Okay. Restaurer les forêts dégradées. Okay, degraded. If you hear dégradé in forest in French, it's just going to be degraded. Le boisement. Okay, reboisement I've heard of, reforestation. Just boisement by itself, and the technical term is afforestation. Huh. Okay, Spanish. Forestation, reforestation. It's a fairly straightforward. Russian. Лесонасаждение и лесовосстановление. There you go. I'll tell you what, if you're going to a meeting on forests, you know Russia's going to be there. This is some stuff you need to know. Okay, indicators. Not very exciting. Okay, 15.3. Combat desertification. Restore degraded land and soil, including land affected by desertification, drought, and floods. Strive to achieve a land degradation neutral world. Okay, I think that's pretty straightforward. You know, just your inondation, sécheresse, all that sort of thing. Proportion of land that's degraded over total land. So yes, not deteriorate. There might be a temptation if you're new to this to be used to say something like deteriorated, but degraded is very much the mot juste. Soil degradation, okay, is an expression that's used a lot. Again, maybe the Russian ones might worth just to looking up. You know, might not run into them as frequently, but опустынивание, desertification, засухами, droughts, наводнениями, floods. Okay, 15.4. Ensure conservation of mountain ecosystems, including biodiversity. Provide benefits, that's easy. We don't need to look at anything there. Indicator. Protected areas of important sites for mountain biodiversity. Mountain green cover index. This is the sort of stuff that, you know, the Stans might talk about. I'd almost say that your Stans are more exercised by this kind of stuff than the Russians are, because I guess all these things to do with mountains is a very, you know, it's a big part of the Stan's economy. Be it whoever it is, you know, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, those are mountain. They call themselves. They say that Tajikistan is a mountain country. So, and then when they speak, they'll speak fast. They'll speak in monotone, and they'll use all these expressions. So yeah, it's good to be ready for them. Target 15.5. Take urgent, significant action to reduce the degradation of natural habitats, halt loss of biodiversity, prevent the extinction of threatened species. Let's see what that is in the other languages. Okay, protéger les espaces menacés, prévenir leur extinction. That's easy enough. In French, especies amenazadas, evitar su extinción. And in Russian, okay, сохранение, okay. Сохранение, исчезновение. There you go. See, this is what I said at the start of this goal. Okay, it's not the disappearance. The technical expression is the extinction of species. Okay, that are threatened with extinction. Now, вымирание, maybe that's the word for extinction then. Red list index. Oh, I've come across it. Maybe it's worth pointing. I say if you're in the Russian one, I have done a Russian episode. A while back now, over a year ago, and it was Russia speaking. It was all about flora and fauna in the Russian Federation, and I think the red, and then it was like the references to red list. I might put the link up here so that you can give out practice, because yeah. It's a good one for you Russisons to do, actually. Have all these bizarre species of animals were mentioned in it in Russia. And it's good just to have it, you know, if you just go through it once, it'll just refresh your knowledge perhaps of some of those more important species. So again, if you run into a meeting like this, you'll have something that you can sort of refer back to. Okay, 15.6. Promote fair, equitable sharing of benefits arising from utilization of genetic resources. Promote appropriate access to resources as internationally agreed. Okay, blah, blah. Equitable sharing of benefits. 15.7. Urgent action. End poaching. Important word. Trafficking of protected species of flora and fauna. Address demand and supply of illegal wildlife products. Okay, poaching. Les braconniers. In French. Okay. Mettre au terme au braconnage. Okay, very important word, that one. Okay, trafficking espèce végétale, animal. Okay, also espèce végétale et animal is flora and fauna. I suppose you could say vegetal and animal species, but the technical term is flora and fauna. Spanish, let's see. La casa. La casa furtiva. Ooh, is that what trafficking is, eh? La casa furtiva. Okay, flora y fauna, they just say it. Productos silvestres, okay, that word silvestre referring to forests, okay? Oh, wildlife, sorry, that's the word. Okay, See, even I get things wrong sometimes. That is that word you come a lot. Silvestres. That's wild, to do with wildlife. I thought it was to do with forests. Thinking Latin, was that not the word for forest or wood in Latin? Silva or something. Russian. Okay, браконьерство, so it's like the French, right? Very similar. Продукты живой природы, wildlife products. That's what. Живой природы. Wildlife. Okay, 15.8. 2020 introduced measures to prevent introduction and significantly reduce the impact of invasive alien species. Hello. On land and water ecosystems and control or eradicate the priority species. Were the aliens not just invading the US a few weeks ago? There was not all these talk of UFOs and whatnot. Invasive alien species. Let's see what these are called in the other languages. D'espèces exotiques envahissantes. Spanish. Similar. Especies exóticas invasoras. Russian. Проникновение чужеродных инвазивных видов. Чужеродных. Wouldn't have known that. Alien invasive species. Okay. You can impress your friends next time then. The aliens invade the US and you can use that vocab. Proportion of countries adopting relative, okay, control of invasive alien species, right. 59, integrate ecosystem biodiversity values, international local planning development process, probably eruptions, and cats, a very general one, isn't it? I don't think we need to look at that in too much detail. National targets in accordance or similar to the Aichi Biodiversity Target 2 of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity. Okay, I'm not so familiar with that. Aichi Biodiversity Target. Maybe I've heard it mentioned before. Okay, well, you know it now. 15A, mobilize significantly increased financial resources from all sources to conserve and sustainably use biodiversity and ecosystems. Alright, indicator, anything there? ODA, conservation, sustainable use. Straightforward enough. 15B, mobilize significant resources from all sources, all levels, finance, sustainable forest management. I'm sure I've heard that referred to as SFM, if you're like in the meeting specifically on forests. Incentives to developing countries to advance such management for conservation and reforestation. What about other indicators? Again, ODA, blah, blah. 15C, enhance global support for efforts to combat poaching, trafficking. We've had that again. Increasing capacity of local communities to pursue sustainable livelihood opportunities. That's always like a favorite UN expression. Let's just remind ourselves of sustainable livelihood. D'assurer durablement leur subsistance. French, what do you say? Or the Spanish, what do you say? Oportunidades de subsistencia sostenibles. Russians. Существование экологически безопасным образом. Bit different. Yeah, that's how they say it in the Russian anyway. Not quite the same as in the original. Okay, that's 15. Only 2 to go. Stay with me, stay with me. Last big push to the end. Try not to fall asleep. Okay, promote peaceful, inclusive society, sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, build effective, accountable, inclusive institutions at all levels. That word's important, accountable, right? Anything interesting there in the other languages? Efficace, responsable, okay, accountable, responsable, not very exciting. Подотчетный, accountable. Okay. Let's see the diagram for this one. Peace, justice, strong institutions, inclusive societies. Largest number of violent conflict-affected countries. That's a good sort of compound expression to be familiar with. What is in French? En proie de conflit. Les pays en proie de conflit. Conflict-affected. Forcibly displaced, homicide, corruption, bribes. Okay, let's see if any of this is mentioned in the actual targets and indicators then. So, where are we? 16.1, significantly reduce all forms of violence and related death rates everywhere. Victims of intentional homicide. I suppose the homicide is a very sort of bureaucratic word, and a bit more instead of murder. Subject to physical violence, psychological violence, sexual violence, previous 12 months. Proportion of population feels safe walking alone around the area they live after dark. Okay. Sometimes it's good just to have a grasp of, have an idea of when statistics, when someone starts giving you statistics, that often statistics are given in numbers per 100,000. You know, it's intentional homicides per 100,000 of the population, just to give you a sort of ballpark idea of where you stand. Okay, end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, all forms of violence against and torture of children. This doesn't seem very difficult. It seems quite aggression by caregivers. That's an important word to know. Going into English, coming from English. Victims of human trafficking per 100,000. Okay. 16.3, promote the rule of law, national, international levels, equal justice for all. Victimization, you also have re-victimization. Okay. Unsentenced detainees as proportion of the overall prison population. Formal, informal dispute resolution mechanism. Okay. 16.4, reduce illicit financial and arms flows. Strengthen the recovery and return of stolen assets and combat all forms of organized crime. Okay, there's a couple of things that might be interesting here. Okay, illicit financial flows, flux financiers illicites, récupération, recovery, restitution des biens volés. So what do we say that was in English? Recovery of stolen assets, was it? Recovery, return of stolen assets. Spanish, what do you say in this? What do you Castilians say? Recuperación, devolución de los activos robados, all right. Delinquencia, just remember that, that's crime, right? Not delinquency. Okay. Возвращение похищенных активов. Okay. For illicit financial flows, незаконные финансовые потоки. Okay, 16.5. Substantially reduce corruption, bribery in all their forms. Indicators. One, contact with the public official made a bribe. Okay, bribe. Let's see what. That's a very important word to know, coming from other languages. Okay. French. What do we have? Les pots de vin. Jeez, I don't know if I'd have. Oh, would I? I know the expression grasser les pattes, but so remember that. Pratique des pots de vin. Don't know if I'd have got that. El soborno. Okay, that sounds familiar from Spanish. El soborno. And in Russian, what have we got? Sviatochnичество. Bit of a mouthful, but I think I'd have got that. Don't know if I'd have got pot de vin. Anyway, there you go. Take note. 16.6. Effective, accountable, transparent institutions at all levels, blah, blah. Government expenditures, proportion of original budget. Okay, not very interesting. Ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory, representative decision-making at all levels. Okay. Again, nothing very exciting there. Broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. Voting rights, okay, developing countries. Legal, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. This is a bit of a cause célèbre these days, you know. Certainly in the treaty bodies, when I have to do country reviews, and it's like the committees want to hear what the countries have done to ensure that all babies are properly, all births are registered. Yep, and that is the statistic that they use during the proportion of children under 5 years of age whose births have been registered with the civil authorities. That's just useful wording to be familiar with, all right? I think in the other languages, at least the target is enregistrement des naissances. Okay, Spanish, probably something similar. Is it matriculación? El registro de nacimientos. Russian, свидетельство о рождении. Okay, for birth registration. Okay. 16.10. Ensure public access to information, protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation and international agreements. Verified cases of killing, kidnapping, enforced disappearance, arbitrary detention, torture of journalists, associated media personnel, trade unionists, human rights advocates in the previous 12 months. Okay, this is important. This sort of stuff comes up in the treaty bodies, certainly in Geneva, and these concepts of like enforced disappearance, arbitrary detention, human rights advocates, human rights defenders, as they're sometimes known. Countries that implement constitutional, statutory, or policy guarantees for public access to information. Yeah, I think this is... which committee is it that's most active in that? Maybe it's on civil and political rights, human rights committee. 16A, strengthen relevant national institutions through international cooperation for building capacity at all levels, in particular in developing countries to prevent violence, combat terrorism and crime. Existence of independent national human rights institutions in compliance with the Paris Principles. That's an important concept, okay. The treaty bodies, they talk about it all the time, this. The need for an independent NHRI, as they will often get called, National Human Rights Institution, and the need for that institution to comply with the Paris Principles. I'm not entirely certain what the Paris Principles are, but they always get referenced. Okay, and finally, promote, enforce non-discriminatory laws and policies for sustainable development. Okay, there's the indicator. So that one's actually fairly straightforward. I think SDG 16 shouldn't pose too many problems. And so that means that we've only got one left. We're almost there. So number 17, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. Okay, I just want to look up the revitalize the global partnership. That's a word, an expression they often use at UN again, revitalizing things. Renforcer les moyens. Revitalizar in the Russian. I'm having a bit of trouble opening the Russian one, but Активизировать, revitalize. Okay, so the diagram, anything useful here? Debt burden, le fardeau de la dette, all right. Or in Spanish, la carga del deuda. Okay, internet use, ODA, ODA, official development assistance. Foreign direct investment, FDI, you can use that as an acronym. Remittances, las remesas, very important word. What are they again in French? They are, we'll come to it anyway. Remesas in Spanish anyway. Let's look at the targets and indicators. Okay, strengthen domestic resource mobilization through international support developing countries to improve domestic capacity for tax and revenue collection. Okay, how do you say that then in French? Tax and revenue collection. Collecte de l'impôt et d'autres recettes. Okay, might not see, it doesn't seem that easy necessarily. Recette for revenue, right? Recaudar ingresos fiscales y de otra índole. Okay, moving on. So the indicator here, government revenue as proportion of GDP. All right. Developed countries to implement fully the ODA commitments, including commitment of many developing countries to achieve the target of 0.7% of ODA to GNI. Okay, that's an important figure to know. Okay, I've run into that figure. These figures here are actually important. Okay, 0.7% of GNI should be devoted to ODA. So GNI, gross national income. I think GNI and GDP are pretty much one and the same thing. Again, I'm not like I wasn't a scientist before. I'm not really an economist either, but I think GNI and GDP are more or less one and the same. And the idea is that the country should be dedicating 0.7% of their GNI to ODA, and then to developing countries, and then 0.15 or 0.2% to the LDCs. Okay, so that's certainly the number that I've run into of those figures here. That's the one I've run into the most. And another, so this is called Revenu National Brut in French. Ingreso Nacional Bruto in Spanish. The Russian page for some reason won't open for me, unfortunately, on goal 17, which is very annoying. But yeah. Indicator. Gross national income, yeah, for GN, that's what GNI stands for. 17.3, mobilize additional financial resources of developing countries from multiple sources. Indicators, volume of remittances. Still trying to remember what it is in French. 17.4, assist developing countries in attaining long-term debt sustainability through coordinated policies aimed at fostering debt financing, debt relief, and debt restructuring as appropriate. Address the external debt of the highly indebted poor countries to reduce debt distress. So a lot of debt here, isn't there? Okay, let's see, 17.4. Debt allègement. Okay, debt relief. That's what they say in French. Allègement. Restructuration speaks for itself. And then in Spanish, what is it? Alivio. There we go. Alivio y la reestructuración de la deuda. And then this thing here, this highly indebted poor countries. I remember they don't talk about it much more, but there used to be something called the HIPIC initiative. Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. It was basically to help countries that were in debt. It was called HIPIC, if ever you run into that. And they were called, les pays pauvres très endettés, or in Spanish, endeudamiento excesivo. All right. reduce debt distress. Do they render that in the French? Réduire le surendettement. Yeah, debt distress. Is that what we say in English, eh? Okay, 17.5, adopt, implement investment promotion regimes for the LDCs. Okay, nothing much there. 17.6, enhance North-South, South-South triangular regional international cooperation, access to science, technology, innovation, knowledge sharing and mutually agreed terms. Okay, global technology facilitation mechanism. They talk about this a lot. I think it's all fairly straightforward from in the other languages. Yeah, these things again come often as a package. These three ideas: North-South cooperation, South-South, triangular, regional and international cooperation. I don't think they would pose any problems coming from the other languages or going into other languages. It's just to be aware that they'll often get quoted as a package. 17.7, promote development, transfer, dissemination, diffusion of environmentally sound technologies to developing countries on favourable terms, including on concessional and preferential terms as mutually agreed. So it's important sort of trade vocab here. Environmentally sound technologies. Let's see what the French say here. For sound, you see. Technologie respectueuse de l'environnement. Okay. Respectful of the environment. You could probably say environmentally friendly technologies is the first thing that springs to my mind. Y compris privilégié et préférentiel. Concessional and preferential terms. Okay. And they talk about privilégié. Compris conditions favorables, y compris privilégié, concessional. Preferentiel, straightforward enough. Okay. Concessional for privilégié. And in Spanish, condiciones concesionarias, that's easier, isn't it? They talk about ecológicamente racionales for environmentally sound. Okay, 17.8. Fully operational, anything from the indicators of interest? More or less the same thing. Okay, 17.8. Fully operationalize the technology bank and science, technology, innovation, capacity building mechanisms released developed companies by 2017. Enhance the use of enabling technology, in particular information and communications technology. Enabling technology. Let's just see what that is in the other languages. Technologie clé. Not very exciting. Tecnologías instrumentales. Okay, enabling. Often talk about enabling environment, enabling technologies. And this is ICTs, information and communications technology. That's certainly, if you're going into English, that's a real obvious shortcut. ICTs. Okay. Los TICs, right? In Spanish and French, right? Tecnología de la información y las comunicaciones. I think you hear TICs used quite a bit. 17.9, enhance international support. Again, these things aren't coming to mind right now in the Russian. It's been a long week. I don't know why it's not opening for me. Strange. Enhance international support for implementing effective targeted capacity building in developing countries to support national plans to implement all the SDGs, including through North-South, South-South triangular cooperation. There we go again. Dollar value of assistance. Okay, 17.10, promote universal rules-based, open, non-discriminating, equitable, multilateral trading system under the WTO, including through the conclusion of negotiations under its Doha development agenda. Okay, I've run into this sort of stuff a lot. I think it's all fairly obvious coming again. OMC, of course, Organisation Mondiale du Commerce. And I think it's the same in Spanish, del comercio. Organización Mundial de Comercio, OMC, okay, WTO. The Doha round. They often talk about the Doha round, the negotiations of the Doha round. Weighted tariff average. Okay. 17.11. Significantly increase exports to developing countries, and in particular with the view to doubling the least developed countries' share of global exports by 2020. Share of global exports. Okay. Leur part. I think that word in French, this their share. La part. Okay, the share. And in Spanish, la participación, okay, for the share, all right. 12, realize timely implementation of duty-free, quota-free. These are important expressions. Market access on a lasting basis for all LDCs, consistent with WTO. Preferential rules of origin applicable to imports. Okay, this stuff is important. Duty-free and quota-free. What do we have here? Franchise de douane. Marché en franchise de douane. Duty-free. Sans contingent. Ooh, didn't know that. Quota-free, huh? Did not know that. Quota-free. A new franchise de douane, duty-free. Sans contingent, quota-free. All right. And in Spanish, okay, got it here. Mercados libre de derechos. Okay, that's fairly straightforward. Contingentes. Contingentes. This is to do quota-free. 12. Okay, this weighted average tariff. Okay. Targets enhance global macroeconomic stability through policy coordination and policy coherence. Boring. Macroeconomic dashboard. Never heard of it. 1714. Enhance policy coherence for sustainable development. Again, pretty straightforward, I think, there. 1715. Respect each country's policy space and leadership to establish and implement policies for poverty eradication and sustainable development. That shouldn't pose too many problems. Country-owned results framework. This is the very idea of important of national ownership of whatever it happens to be, including frameworks. 1716, the global partnership, enhance the global partnership for sustainable development. Multi-stakeholder partnerships. They love multi-stakeholder partnerships at the UN. Maybe it's a good time just to remind us of what that is in other languages. Des partenariats multipartites in French, in Spanish. Alianzas entre múltiples interesados, multi-stakeholder partnerships. Knowledge sharing, that's a good collocation, I always think. Support achievement SDGs, okay. Indicators, reporting progress, okay. 1717, encourage, promote effective public-private, civil society partnerships, building on the experience and resourcing strategies of partnerships. 1718, enhance capacity building support to developing countries, including for LDCs and SIDS, to increase the availability of high-quality, timely, reliable data disaggregated by income, gender, age, race, ethnicity, migratory, disability, geographic location, other characteristics relevant in national context. I think that's fairly straightforward. Just remember this word in French, ventiler, okay. Breakdown, disaggregated or breakdown by, you can use either or. In the Spanish, desglosados, that's it, desglosados is the Spanish version for disaggregated. Okay. Statistics here, and 1719, last one, our last target, last but definitely not least. By 2030, build on existing initiatives to develop measurements of progress on sustainable development that complement gross domestic product and support statistical capacity building in developing countries. You see, why do they use here GDP here but GNI before, I wonder? Maybe if you know, please do tell me, share it with us in the comments. Anything in the comments, any interesting ideas you have, anything you disagree with, any other stuff that I've skipped or things that you'd like to add, put them in the comments, by the way. And so, produit intérieur brut, okay, for GDP. Just interesting, tirer parti des initiatives existantes. That's an expression I seem to have run into quite a bit recently, and I'm going to take advantage of. I think I even had it in the last episode. We had episode 167, we talked about tirer parti of something or other, and they actually say here, build on. You see, build on existing initiatives. So that's just a good little pair of solutions to be aware of. And in Spanish, that last one, aprovechar, okay, take advantage of, build on. Producto Interno Bruto, PIB, okay. All right, that's it, guys. That is, I've completed my vocabulary breakdown of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It's been quite a journey. Probably taken me about 6 hours altogether. Hope you found it useful. If you have, please do tell me in the comments section any new stuff that you've learned, like I said, or any other contributions you want to make that can enhance, clarify our understanding of what's going on. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't open SDG 17 in Russian, wasn't opening for me. Sorry about that. Guys who hopefully, as I say, this wasn't just for you guys with French, Spanish and Russian. Hopefully if you've got other languages, that should give you a good guide as to what vocabulary to look out for generally when studying the SDGs. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and that's about it for today. So all that remains for me to say is that episode 168 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.
The train is now leaving the Interpretation Station. We hope you enjoyed your visit. Until next time, folks.